A very good afternoon to all of you. I hope all of you are doing good and I hope your preparation is going fine. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 15th of December 2023 and we are here to discuss important articles from The Hindu and The Indian Express. Now the handout of this session is there in the description box. You may utilize it to streamline your current affairs preparation. Now coming to the table of contents. The first topic is very important topic related to the taxation in India and how the taxation system in India works. Second topic is related to stock exchanges. Third, again a very important topic, is related to suspension of member of parliaments. Fourth topic is production linked incentive, and fifth topic is your asymmetric federalism. So let's start with the first topic. The first topic is related to taxation system in India. Now why it is news? Because recently India's net direct tax receipts has increased and has risen by 23.4% by November 30. Now, in order to understand this net direct tax, we need to understand what are direct taxes and what are indirect taxes. And while understanding that, we'll be trying to understand the taxation system in the country. Now, why it is important for our syllabus? Because again, GS paper 3, Indian economy section and the government budgeting section, this taxation system becomes very, very important. Now, directly jumping on to the topic. Now, before understanding the taxation system of our country, we need to understand the meaning of the simple term that what is a tax. Now, tax is a payment which the people of a country, tax is a kind of a fee or a levy which a people of a country has to pay to the government compulsorily. Because government is providing certain services to the public, social services, welfare services, building roads, dams, bridges. Now, in order to provide all those services, government requires revenue. And from where will the government get the revenue? Government will impose a tax on the public. So, tax are the compulsory payments being done by the public to the government, right? This is a tax. Now, what is the purpose of this tax? Again, one thing which I told you, that allocation of resources. So, first of all, tax is a form of revenue for the government. And once the government is getting that revenue, government is having the resources now, but government now needs to allocate the resources effectively and efficiently in the country. That is one purpose of taxation. Now, another purpose in this allocation of resources is that let's say some people are very rich and some people are very poor, right? So what the government does is it takes more taxes from the rich and then from that tax collection, it gives benefits to the poor. So in a way, it is leading to distribution of income in the country and moving towards income equality. That is one purpose of taxation as well. And another purpose is inflation control. Now, we all know that inflation happens whenever the money supply in the country is very, very high. And whenever the money supply is high, if the government imposes more taxes, government soaks up the money which is there in the market. And once the government soaks up the money which is there in the market, ultimately inflation will be controlled in the economy. And that is also a purpose of taxation in any of the countries. Now, what are two basic type of taxes which is very, very important for us to understand? Now, let's understand this with the help of an example. So, let's say there is a person known as P, right? That is the person, the people of the country. And this is the government. Now, we understood that people have to pay taxes ultimately to the government. Now, let's say people are directly paying the tax to the government, right? That form of tax where the people of the country are directly depositing the tax to the pockets of the government, that kind of tax is known as a direct tax. But let's say while depositing this tax to the government, in between there is a person known as intermediary. So what is happening? That people are depositing tax to this intermediary and ultimately that intermediary is giving tax to the government. So in that case, there is an intermediary involved. In that case, the tax which we are talking about is known as indirect tax. So what are the examples of direct tax? Direct tax, the best example is the income tax which we all pay. So the income tax paid by the people of the country, it is paid directly by the people to the government. That is why it is a direct tax. But let's say the tax which you're paying on the chips which you buy or the clothes which you buy, are you paying it directly to the government? Not at all. You are paying it to the vendor, to the producer, and ultimately they are paying to the government. So there is an intermediary in between. So for example, your GST, or earlier it was your VAT. So all those taxes are the best examples of indirect taxes. So direct tax, simply your income tax which we pay. Indirect tax, the best example is the GST which we are paying on all the products right now. Because we are not directly paying the GST to the government, but ultimately that GST is being deposited to the government exchequer only, right? So that is the difference and distinction between direct tax and indirect tax. I hope it is very, very clear to all of you. Now, what are the various methods of taxation? That how a tax can be levied on the people and imposed on the people. So first, very simple form of tax is the progressive tax. Progressive tax is very simple, that as and when the income of the people rise, the tax amount also rises. So for example, till 5 lakh, I don't have to pay any tax. Over and above, if the income is there, then initially I have to pay 5% tax. If the income rises even higher, I will have to pay 10% tax. Income rises even higher, I will have to pay 20% of income tax. And if the income is more than 20 lakh, more than 30 lakh, I'll have to pay 30% tax as well, right? So once the income is rising, the tax amount which you need to pay and the tax which is levied on you is also rising. That kind of tax is known as progressive taxation. And income tax in our country is the best example of progressive taxation. But there is another form of taxation as well. That is regressive taxation. Now I'll explain regressive taxation with the help of a very simple example. So let's say you are buying a 20 rupees chips packet. So let's say if you are buying 20 rupees chips packet. Now if you are buying this packet, and let's say a rich person is buying this packet and a poor person is buying the packet, will they have to pay same tax on that chips packet? The answer is yes. So if they have to pay the same amount of tax, and they are rich or poor, that is not the consideration, but they have to pay the similar amount of tax to the government. That kind of tax is known as a regressive taxation. Why? Because in this chips, let's say 2 rupees, the tax needs to be paid, which is inclusive in this 20 rupees. This 2 rupees for poor people, this amount is very, very high, but for rich, it is negligible. So regressive taxes are such in which the burden on poor is very high, but the burden on rich is very low, because rich and poor are paying the same level of taxes. So for example, you are enrolling for a course in Vajiram and Ravi or any of the institutes. You are paying GST. Now, if you are rich also, you will have to pay the same amount of GST, and the person who's rich also, they have to pay the same amount of GST, right? This is a kind of regressive taxation. So again, what's the example of it? GST only, right? Now, proportional taxation is such, it's little bit similar to regressive taxation, but here the taxation is based on the proportion. So for example, let's take the example of income tax only. So let's say if the country says that if your income is more than 50,000, I don't care whatever your income is, 10% of the income, so proportion of 10% of your income, you will be paying to the government as taxes. Doesn't matter your income is higher or lower or very, very high. 10% is the amount which I've fixed, and you'll have to pay on the basis of the proportion of 10% of your total income to the government as taxes. That is a proportional taxation. I hope these methods of taxation is very, very clear to all of you. Now let's very quickly see the reforms which are made in the direct tax system. Direct tax system, if you remember, that we are directly paying the tax to the government, right? So what are the reforms made there? So one reform is the provision of direct tax code. Now the aim of this direct tax code is to streamline all the other tax laws, direct tax laws in a country, and creation of a one very important and one very streamlined code whereby all the laws will be made in a simplified manner. So all the laws at one place and streamlining the laws, making it more effective and efficient in implementation. That is your aim of direct tax code. Now this dividend distribution tax, this was abolished, and the dividend income which you will be receiving on the share market, right, or in the stock market, now that dividend income will be taxable under the income tax which you will be paying. So that is one reform made by the central government. And also very important reform is the transparent taxation, honoring the honest initiative by the government, launched in 2020. Now it involves first thing your faceless assessment. That means the person who will be assessing your tax, the person who will be assessing what tax you need to pay, they will not be knowing whose tax I'm assessing. So there will be faceless assessment, right? Again, in order to improve the level of efficiency and to reduce the level of corruption, right? Okay, taxpayer charter will be there. So taxpayer charter, it basically includes the rights of the taxpayers and the duties of the taxpayers, so that taxpayers are made more and more aware. So taxpayer charter is there. Then faceless assessment. So faceless assessment and faceless appeal is also there. So you can appeal also in a faceless manner. That means the other person who's hearing your appeal, seeing your appeal, would not be knowing that who is appealing to me, right? So again, in order to reduce the level of corruption, bring in more efficiency, transparency, and effectiveness. Okay, now this general anti-avoidance rule. Now general anti-avoidance rule is there, where the income tax authorities or the taxation authorities, they are having special powers that if they think that a particular transaction is specifically made to reduce the tax burden and to evade taxes, then the income tax authorities and the taxation authorities are having the power to take action against those people who are evading the taxes. So general anti-avoidance rule. So to avoid the tax, in order to, when the people avoid the tax, for that, the rule is made, that is general anti-avoidance rule. So reforms in indirect taxes. The biggest reform, you all know that it's the biggest reform of indirect taxes in the century. In the independent India, we will say that is your introduction of goods and services tax. So amalgamation of lot of indirect taxes, VAT, sales tax, custom duty, a lot of other taxes was there, and eventually this GST came into being. Of course, it's divided currently into CGST, Central Goods and Services Tax, SGST, State Goods and Services Tax, then IGST, Integrated Goods and Services Tax. I hope this taxation part is very, very clear to all of you. Now let's see some diagrams over here. So in this particular diagram, you will see that tax to GDP ratio, right? The tax to GDP ratio of our country from 2011-12 to 2021-2022, it has hovered around 5.5 to 6%. And the latest is the 6% tax to GDP ratio. And not just tax to GDP ratio, direct tax to GDP ratio, right? So direct tax as compared to the level of GDP, it is close to 6%. And again, we need to make it more higher, right? And this needs to be higher, this needs to be reaching at a higher value. Now, this particular thing over here, you will see that which all states are paying the maximum direct taxes and having the highest direct tax collection. So Maharashtra is at the first spot in 5.2 lakh crores. So this data is for financial year 2022, and Maharashtra paid 5.2 lakh crores of direct taxes. That is Maharashtra. From Maharashtra, direct tax collection was this much. From Delhi, it was 1.8 lakh crore. From Karnataka comes the third. Fourth, it's Tamil Nadu. Fifth, it's Gujarat. So this also, some factual parts you should know. Now coming to this particular graph. This particular graph shows that over the years, the direct tax growth and indirect tax growth, they have seen volatility. Because you will see some years it will be very high, some years it will be totally low, then again it will be higher, again it will be lower. So you will see there is no, I would say there is no stability in the tax collections. Some years it is rising, some year it's lowering. But over the years, if you see, the GDP rate has been stabilized. So GDP has been growing at a good number, and we have stability in the GDP growth rate. We are growing at a very good pace. This year also 7% growth rate is projected of our GDP. But direct taxes and indirect taxes, their collection is varying over the years. Now the reasons are a variety of them, but we need to understand this trend. I hope this taxation system in India is very, very clear to all of you. Now coming to the second topic, again an important topic related to stock exchanges. Now recently, India's benchmark indexes have soared records high because of the various reasons and variety of reasons, especially the steps taken by the US Federal Reserve. Now we need to understand what are these stock indexes, what are stock exchanges, and what is a stock market. Because if we do not understand that, we will not be able to understand this particular news and this article. And again, why this is important for a General Studies Paper 3, this topic is very important for us. Okay, General Studies Paper 3, Indian Economy section. Okay, so coming to the topic of stock exchanges. Now, before understanding stock exchanges, you need to understand what is a financial market. So, financial market is a market which connects the people who are having surplus funds, right, to the people who are having deficient funds. So people who are having surplus funds, they need to give the money to the people who are having deficient funds, and also they will earn money with this. That is the whole game which is surrounding the financial market of any country. right? Now let's say financial market is also a market whereby you can raise funds. So I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say I'm the owner of a company, and I'm the owner of a company. I want to start expanding my businesses, right? Now I'm having few options. First option is that I use my own profit in order to expand my business. Second option I'm having is that let me take some loan, right? Let me take some loan. I will take maybe loan from my friends, my family, or let's say I will take loan from the bank. So the loans which I take in order to expand my business or do anything with my business, that is known as debt, right? But another option also I'm having. So let's say right now I am the 100% owner of the company. I will say that why not dilute 10% of the ownership? Let me sell off 10% of the ownership of my company and then generate funds. Because ultimately, then I will just be 90% owner of the company and 10% shares of my company I would have sold. Now, this option, if I go for, then I am going for an option which you call as equity. And if I go for the equity option, then I will have to sell the ownership of my company. So I have to give up the ownership of my company. And the ownership which I give up, it is divided into small, small units. And those small units is what you call as shares. Or stocks is also the term which you use for it. Now, since you have understood from here that what is debt, what is equity, now let's focus more on equity part. Debt we don't have to discuss, but let's focus more on equity part. So let's say if I go for the equity option, I do not go for using my profits, I do not go for the debt part, I go for equity option. Now if I'm going for the equity option, right now I'm the 100% owner of my company, right? But I want to give up 10% ownership of my company. Let's say at whichever value I want. Now in that case, I will have to take certain steps. First, I need to go to the market, get listed in a stock exchange, and give the ownership of my company to the people, to the general public. If I'm able and if I'm willing to give the ownership of my company to the general public, that means I have to go to a stock exchange. And in that case, let's say if I'm going to the stock exchange for the first time, to give away the ownership of my company and to sell shares of my company, the first time when I go and I tell to the people that you buy the shares of my company, I am choosing initial public offering. Initial public offering. That means for the first time, you are offering your shares to the public. You are offering the public the stocks of your company. That is your initial public offering. I hope this is very, very clear. Now, let's say people have bought the 10% ownership of your company. People divided into multiple shares, 1,000, 1 lakh shares, let's say any amount of shares they bought. Now, IPO has been done, initial public offering, people got offered the shares, people also took the offer, they bought the shares. Now, let's say people amongst themselves now, they will buy and sell the shares. Understand one thing. The first step is, I as a company, I am selling the shares to the public for the first time. That is your IPO. But let's say after the IPO happens, people start distributing the shares amongst themselves because share will be having a price. So let's say I tell to the other person, okay, I want to buy 20 more shares from you because now people are having the control over the shares. So people amongst them, once they start trading in the shares, we come to the concept of secondary market. The first transaction, the initial public offering, in which market it was happening? It was happening in the primary market. So initial public offering was happening in the primary market. But the sale and purchase of shares amongst the people themselves, it is happening in secondary market. And secondary market is nothing but the stock market or the stock exchange which you see. So stock market or stock exchange is nothing but where the purchase and sale of shares of stocks of companies takes place. So let's see over the diagram over here. So let's say I am wanting to buy a stock. So I will go to the broker, I will tell the broker I want to buy a stock. Now let's say there is a person who wants to sell that stock. So the seller will also go to the broker, right? So the broker will be having contact or in touch with the buyers and sellers of the share. So the broker will take the shares from the seller and give it to the buyer. That is the role of the broker. And the place, the marketplace in which all these transactions would be happening is what you call as a stock exchange. And the most popular stock exchange of our country, it is Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange of our country, that is India. So these two are the most prominent stock exchanges in our country. If you see the diagram over here, then also you will realize that the buyer has to contact with the broker and then seller also has to contact with the broker. And the transaction takes place in a stock exchange, which is your National Stock Exchange or Bombay Stock Exchange, because they are the most popular stock exchanges in India, right? I hope this stock exchange concept is very, very clear to you. So stock exchange, a marketplace where the stocks, where the shares are exchanged amongst themselves. And exchanged amongst whom? Exchanged amongst the buyers and the sellers. That is what your stock exchange really is. Now those stock exchanges, they're having list of various companies. So various companies have listed themselves in stock exchange, right? That, okay, I want to sell my shares, I want to sell my shares. In the stock exchange, variety of companies are listed. Now there is something which you call as a stock market index or stock index. Now what is that index? So index is the group of companies which a stock market creates. So for example, Bombay Stock Exchange. Now Bombay Stock Exchange clubs certain companies and they create an index and they start monitoring the price of that index. They start monitoring cumulatively that the prices of these companies' shares, is it going up, is it going down? And they start analyzing it. And such type of stock indexes which are created with multiple listings of the companies, the top 20, the top 30, the top 40 companies that are taken into account in the stock exchanges. The most popular one are Sensex and Nifty. I hope you must have heard of the Sensex and Nifty a lot of times in the newspapers, but now you'll be trying to understand what is the Sensex and Nifty, right? So Sensex, the full form is Stock Exchange Sensitive Index, and it is the oldest stock index in the Bombay Stock Exchange. So Bombay Stock Exchange, we all know it is a stock exchange where purchase and sale of shares takes place, stocks takes place. And this Bombay Stock Exchange has created a list of companies, top 30 stocks, that is top 30 shares in the Bombay Stock Exchange. Their list has been created and the index has been created whereby the prices of the stocks will be monitored. And that index is known as your Sensex. And it is listed on the exchange. So top 30 stocks which are listed in the exchange. These stocks are based on the market capitalization. That what is the market capitalization, what is the revenue of those companies, what is the liquidity, and what is the diversification of the company. I hope Sensex is very, very clear to all of you. So now whenever you hear the term Sensex, and Sensex is rising by these many points, you will understand one thing. Sensex is nothing but a group of companies whose price is being monitored, and these companies are the top 30 companies of Bombay Stock Exchange. I hope this is very, very clear to all of you. Another index is your Nifty, right? Now Nifty is the stock index of a National Stock Exchange. So National Stock Exchange 50, Nifty. So National Stock Exchange 50. So how many companies? 50 companies. Sensex, how many companies? 30 companies. Nifty, 50 companies. An index representing the National Stock Exchange, collection of 50 equity stocks that are actively trading in the market in the National Stock Exchange. It's called Nifty 50 as well, but because it constitutes of the 50 stocks. So I hope this Nifty and Sensex is clear to all of you. So whenever you now hear that the Nifty is going up, Sensex is going up, that means the stocks which are there in that list, their prices are going up or their returns are going up. I hope this is very, very clear to all of you. And whenever the Nifty is going down, Sensex is going down, that means the top companies which are listed in that stock exchange, they are not performing well. Their stocks are not performing well in particular. I hope the Sensex and Nifty concept, the stock exchanges, stock indexes is very, very clear to all of you. Now coming to the third topic, a very important topic related to suspension of member of parliaments. Now recently, yesterday itself, 14 opposition member of parliaments, 13 from the Lok Sabha and 1 from the Rajya Sabha, were suspended after they protested against the security breach in the parliament. So they were suspended. Okay, now why it is important for us? For General Studies Paper 2, it has been categorically mentioned that Parliament and State Legislature powers and privileges, structure, functioning, and conduct of the businesses, and issues arising out of these. So in this way, the suspension of member of parliaments in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha becomes very, very important. Now let's understand first of all that in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, that is the parliament of our country, in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, there is a person known as presiding officer. And the main role and duty of the presiding officer, in Lok Sabha's case it is the speaker, in Rajya Sabha case it is the chairman of Rajya Sabha, their main role of the presiding officers, of speaker and chairman, is to maintain order in the house, is to maintain order in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha respectively, and in order to ensure that smooth functioning of events and business of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha takes place. And in order to ensure this, in order to maintain order and ensure smooth functioning, they are having the power and they are empowered to force member of parliaments to withdraw from the house. That means they can suspend the member of parliaments who are there as a part of Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. And who's having that power? The presiding officer of that house. So presiding officer in case of Lok Sabha, it is the speaker. In case of Rajya Sabha, it is the chairman. Now let us see what are the rules which are governing this suspension in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So let's see the rules which are there in the Lok Sabha which is governing the suspension. So primarily there are two rules. That is Rule 373 and Rule 374. Now Rule 373, now these rules first of all are mentioned in the rules of procedure and conduct of business of the Lok Sabha, right? So rule book of the Lok Sabha. Now Rule 373, it talks about presiding officer can direct the member of parliaments. So it talks about the presiding officer directing the member of parliaments to withdraw from the house if they are engaged in disorderly conduct and they have to remain absent for the remainder of the day. So it is based on suspension for that particular day. If a member of parliament is having some disorderly conduct, is misbehaving in the parliament, misbehaving in the Lok Sabha, so the speaker of Lok Sabha, the presiding officer of the Lok Sabha, is having the power to direct that particular member of parliament to withdraw from the house for the remainder of the day. So remain absent in the house for the remainder of the day. That is suspension based on the day, right? And there is one more rule, that is Rule 374. Now, this rule is particularly made for the people who are more recalcitrant, right? That means the recalcitrant members who are not listening to the presiding officer and again being indulged in the disorderly conduct, right? So there are two parts of it. First is Rule 374, then there is Rule 374A. Now, Rule 374, in this the presiding officer, that is the Speaker of Lok Sabha, can name the member who is disrupting the parliament after repeated warnings. So even after repeated warnings, if a member of parliament is disrupting the proceedings of Lok Sabha, they can be named in the floor, they can be named in that house by the presiding officer. And after that, the house, that is the Lok Sabha, can move a motion against them, a motion of suspension. And eventually, that particular member of parliament, who after repeated warnings also is misbehaving, is having disorderly conduct, they can be suspended for not more than a remainder session period. So that session period for 1 month, 1.5 months, whatever the period of the session is, where the Lok Sabha would be continuing to meet, right? So they will be suspended for the remainder of the session period in this Rule 374. And what has to happen? First, the presiding officer has to name that member in the house, and then a motion will be moved against them, against that particular member. But there is one more thing. One more rule was added, that is Rule 374A, right? This Rule 374A was added in December 2001. Now, the intention behind this was to circumvent the necessity of adopting motion for suspension. Because in this Rule 374, the speaker or the Lok Sabha, right? So the presiding officer, it will name, and after that the Lok Sabha has to pass a motion. So to circumvent this passing of the motion, this Rule 374A was launched. And what happens? In this case, Rule 374A, there will be automatic suspension after naming. So automatic suspension after naming that particular member of parliament. For how much time they will be suspended? For the 5 days or the remaining part of the session. So for the next 5 days or for the remaining part of the session, they might be suspended. I hope this is very, very clear to all of you. So Rule 373, Rule 374. And 374 is having a new part, that is 374A, where automatic suspension will be there without passing the motion. I hope this is very, very clear to all of you. Now the rules of Rajya Sabha. Now Rajya Sabha, there is chairman, presiding officer is the chairman of Rajya Sabha, right? So there are two rules in Rajya Sabha. One is Rule 255, one is Rule 256. And they are mentioned in the rule book of the Rajya Sabha. So in Rule 255, the chairman, that is the presiding officer, can direct any member to withdraw immediately from the house for any disorderly conduct. It's simple. It's as simple as the first rule which we saw in the Lok Sabha. That chairman can direct the member to withdraw immediately from the house in case of any disorderly conduct made by them. There is another rule, Rule 256. Now this Rule 256 is also a little bit similar. That is, the chairman will name the members first. If they are persistently disregarding the authority of the chair and they are repeatedly indulged in the misorderly conduct, even after the chair is telling them not to do, right? So they are disregarding the authority of the chair and abusing the council rules. So in that case, the chairman will name those members and again the house will adopt a motion against them. And they will be suspended again, not more than the remainder session period. So for the remainder of the session period, they will be suspended. I hope this is very clear to all of you. So again, it is a little bit similar to the previous rule which we saw in the Lok Sabha part as well. But there is one more point which you need to remember, and this is a tricky one. That in Lok Sabha, this Rule 374A, in this Rule 374A, automatic suspension can happen after the speaker names that particular member of parliament. But there is no such provision and Rajya Sabha cannot suspend members without passing the motion. In Lok Sabha, there is a provision under Rule 374A that automatic suspension can happen. No need to pass the motion under Rule 374A. But in Rajya Sabha, there is no such provision. So in Rajya Sabha, if a member of parliament has to be suspended, there has to be a motion which needs to be passed. I hope this is very, very clear to all of you. Now coming to the next topic. The topic is related to production-linked incentive scheme of the Government of India. Now, government has been placing its bet on the PLI scheme even more in the last coming months, right? Okay, why it is important? For your GS paper 3, Indian economy section, this production-linked incentive scheme is very, very important. So first we need to understand what is this production-linked incentive scheme. So see this name very particularly, very properly, production-linked incentive. So of course, an incentive will be provided. Who will be providing that incentive? Of course, the government is providing the incentive, right? Linked to what? It will be linked to the levels of production. And who is producing? The producers, the manufacturers, the private sector, right? So government will be providing incentive to the producers, to the manufacturing class, to the manufacturing sector. Why? Why they need to provide them the incentive? In case of incremental production. So in case of incremental production, that means if the private sector, if the manufacturing companies, they incrementally increase their production, not from 100 to 200 units, from 100 if they increase their production to 1 lakh units, from 1000 units to 1 lakh units, incremental increase in production, the government will be providing them an incentive. That incentive can be in the form of interest subvention, reduction of interest, cheaper loans, any kind of incentive government will be able to provide. Now, what are the various sectors which are there under this PLI scheme? PLI scheme is not for the whole manufacturing sector, for the whole industrial sector. There are specific sectors which the government wants to target. We'll discuss why, but there are specific sectors which the government wants to target, whereby the incremental production is a necessity for our country. So what are those sectors? So these are the sectors which are mentioned here. So mobile sector, right? So smartphone sector and all, automobile sector, renewable energy sector, then solar photovoltaic cells sector, then medical devices sector, ACC battery sector, pharmaceuticals is there, then telecommunication services, textiles, electricity, electronics, right? Bulk drugs, specialty steel, white goods, for example, your TVs, air conditioners, washing machines, refrigerators, drone technology. So all these sectors are a part of this production linked incentive scheme. So if you are doing any incremental increase in production under these sectors, you will be getting an incentive from the government. And that incentive will also be a huge incentive. But why the government needs to go for this production linked incentive scheme? That is what we need to understand. See, first reason, of course, is to boost our domestic manufacturing capabilities. That domestically we need to manufacture more and more. And if we manufacture more and more, of course, we'll be able to export the commodities as well, right? And we will be able to have import substitution, because right now for a lot of these products which we discussed, we are heavily dependent on countries like China, countries like US, countries like Europe, right? So we are heavily dependent on those countries, right? But we want import substitution. That is the philosophy of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So we want to achieve that. That is why this production linked incentive scheme is important. And ultimately, it will be providing employment opportunities as well. So micro employment opportunities it will be providing. That is why this production linked incentive is also very important. So in a way, we are seeing that it will strengthen the vision of Make in India also and vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat also. Of course, it will make India a global competitive nation, because India will be manufacturing so many products and at incremental scales, ensure economies of scale, because if we produce more, the overall cost goes down. So economies of scale will be there. And India, it will help India to leapfrog in the manufacturing sector and with cutting edge technology. So technology sector and technology levels of our manufacturing will also improve. Because how can we increase the incremental production? How can we lead to incremental production? Only with the help of cutting edge technologies. So it will help in that respect as well, right? Now, how does this incentive work? I've already told you. It is a kind of subsidy for the sector. A direct payment from the budget to the goods made in the country will be made. Of course, we are motivating the foreign companies also to set up manufacturing units in our country and get this benefit, because you produce more and more in our country. In our country itself, you get the incentive, and overall, our country is going to benefit because of this. Now, amount varies from sector to sector, and it is also based on a disadvantage or disability faced by that sector. So, what are the disadvantages faced by the sector? On the basis of that, that incentive is calculated. I hope this production linked incentive scheme is very, very clear to all of you. Now, coming to the last topic, but not the least, it is related to asymmetric federalism. Now, why this is in news? Because the concept of asymmetric federalism, it has been in news due to the recent judgment given by the Honorable Supreme Court on Article 370 abrogation by the central government. Now, few days back itself, we have covered in the analyst only about Article 370 as well, and after that, the abrogation of Article 370 and the recent Supreme Court judgment as well. So, if you want to understand that particularly, you can refer to the previous last few days analyst videos. It is again important for our general studies paper 2, because the word issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure of our country, this particular statement has been directly mentioned in our general studies paper 2. So we need to understand very basically that what is this asymmetric federalism. So whenever we use this word federalism, we are talking particularly about the center and state relations, and also the relation of states amongst themselves. But why the word asymmetric? Asymmetric means something is not equal, right? So here also we have written that asymmetric federalism, it refers to the unequal powers and relationships being shared in political, administrative and financial arrangement between the federal units who are part of the federation. So federalism involves various federal units who are part of a particular federation, can be center, can be states. So whenever between center and states, and among states themselves, there is unequal power and relationship in political, administrative and fiscal arrangement, you call it as asymmetric federalism. That means powers are not distributed equally, political powers are not distributed equally, fiscal powers are not distributed equally, administrative powers are not distributed equally. That is your asymmetric federalism. Now it can be both vertical and horizontal. How vertical? Between center and state. If there is disparity, there is unequal power and relationship, center and state, this is your vertical federalism. And let's say amongst the states themselves, if the power is unequal, right? If the relationship is unequal, then in that case it is a horizontal federalism. asymmetric federalism, horizontal asymmetric federalism. Now let's come to the vertical asymmetric federalism, that is between center and states. Now how it is the part of our constitution? If you see our Article 3, now center is having the power to unilaterally alter the states' names and boundaries. Now you all know that the nature of our polity, according to several constitutional experts, is quasi-federal. That is, we are not purely federal, but we are quasi-federal, or federal with a centralist tilt, right? So tilt towards the central government. That is what the federalism which we are having as a country, right? So Article 3 gives more power to the center, and central government is having the power to unilaterally alter the name of the states and the boundaries as well. If you see Article 352, 356, national emergency and president's rule can be imposed by the central government. Financial emergency also can be imposed by the central government. And the state's power, they are reduced a lot and they become in a way negligible during the national emergency, also during president's rule as well. And Article 248, now Article 248 of our constitution, it talks about the residuary powers in case of legislation. So if a particular item is not there in the state list or the concurrent list, Parliament is having the authority to legislate on that particular item. So residuary power of legislation is also there with the central government. So in a way, we are seeing that central government is more powerful than the state government, and that is why there is a asymmetric federalism. Powers are not shared equally. Relationship is not equal. Central government is dominant. Now there is horizontal asymmetric federalism as well amongst various states. Why? Because if you see our Schedule 4, unequal representation in the Rajya Sabha, unequal representation of different states in the Rajya Sabha. So, for example, UP is having 31 seats, while the Arunachal Pradesh is having just one. Now, this is also reflective of unequal relationship amongst the states themselves. And also Part 8 of the Constitution, if you see, provisions related to union territories. Now, in union territories, the federal arrangement is different than the other states. That is also a horizontal asymmetry, and particularly your Schedule 5 and Schedule 6. So, Schedule 5 deals with the administration and control of scheduled areas and scheduled tribes residing in any part of the state, any part of the country, except your Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram. And Schedule 6, it talks about the administration of tribal areas of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram, and creation of autonomous districts and autonomous regions in those particular areas, in those particular states. So in a way, we are seeing certain states getting more preference, getting more autonomy, getting more resources as compared to the other states. And in Constitution, only these provisions are enshrined. And according to many constitutional experts, this is leading to horizontal asymmetry federalism as well. Right? And then Article 371 and other articles. So Article 371A to 371J, it gives special provisions for states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Nagaland. So if special provisions are made for these particular states, of course the other states, there will be mismatch between the balance of powers, and there will be unequal power and relationship amongst the states. And also there was Article 370 as well, which was earlier giving special power and special treatment to the state of J&K. So special provisions for state of J&K was there. So again, creation of asymmetry amongst the states themselves. Again, creating a asymmetric federalism amongst the states. And which asymmetric federalism? A horizontal asymmetric federalism. So we studied what is asymmetric federalism, the vertical part of it, the horizontal part of it. I hope this is crystal clear to all of you. So this is the end of the session. I hope you learned something from the session and it was helpful in your exam, in your preparation as well. So all the very best to all of you and prepare well. Good luck.